Welcome to Black Resilience, where real struggles, true voices, and unforgettable stories reveal the cost of hate and the power of justice. Consider this unsettling reality. What would you do if your neighbors summoned law enforcement because you were camping on land you legally owned? For Arthur Hayes, that dreadful possibility materialized one summer night by the lake. The evening was meant for quiet solitude, just the soft hum of nocturnal insects, the subtle lapping of water against the shore, and the lingering scent of mesquite from a dying fire. But tranquility eluded him. Instead of peace, Arthur Hayes woke to the sharp scrape of boots on loose ground and the abrupt, piercing beams of flashlights slicing through his tent. "Exit immediately!" A gruff command shattered the silence. Disoriented and alarmed, Arthur blinked away the vestiges of sleep, unzipped the canvas barrier, and was confronted by two sheriff's deputies, shining powerful lamps straight into his face. A constriction seized his chest as one officer's grasp hovered near his holstered weapon. "Could someone explain this?" Arthur asked, his words gravelly with lingering slumber. "That's precisely what we're here to ascertain," the lead officer retorted sharply. "We received a report about an individual camping unlawfully on private property. We require your identification." Arthur's heartbeat quickened. His gaze drifted to the water, the very expanse his late father had yearned to acquire land beside before he passed. Only weeks prior, Arthur had finalized the acquisition of the 24-acre parcel that adjoined the shores of Lake Travis. This was meant to be his refuge, a place to detach from the demands of his software engineering career in Austin, to fish, to simply exist. Now, subjected to the piercing gazes of two uniformed officers, it seemed more an ambush than an asylum. He retrieved his identification from his satchel and presented his driver's permit. "This property belongs to me," he asserted with conviction. "I purchased it. The title is legally registered to me, Hayes, Arthur Hayes." The more compact officer scrutinized the ID, then eyed Arthur once more. "That remains to be determined. Do you possess any documentation?" "It hardly seemed necessary to transport my land title just to rest on my own ground," Arthur grumbled, striving to maintain his composure. But before the deputies could respond, another figure materialized behind them, a woman in a navy blazer, her hair neatly styled, clutching a clipboard as if it were a symbol of absolute power. Her presence was almost more formidable than the uniforms themselves. "That's him," she declared sharply, pointing at Arthur. "That's the man I observed setting up camp. This land falls under Homeowners Association management, and we do not permit such activities." Arthur stared at her, stunned. "What HOA? This property is not part of any neighborhood collective. I own this land outright." The woman stiffened. "I am Eleanor Vance, president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, and I am acquainted with every single property owner in this vicinity. You do not belong here." Arthur blinked hard, his frustration boiling over. "I am telling you, you are mistaken. This land was never incorporated into Lakeview Estates. Consult your maps." The deputies exchanged glances. One of them murmured into his shoulder radio, requesting confirmation from dispatch. Meanwhile, Eleanor folded her arms, her tone dripping with accusation. "I've resided here for 2 decades. We've always overseen this shoreline. Individuals like you cannot simply appear and establish encampments wherever they wish." "Individuals like me?" Arthur shot back, his voice low but steady. "You mean people who actually hold the deed?" The words hung in the humid Texas air. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Arthur could sense their skepticism, but beneath that, something else, hesitation. He drew a slow breath, scanning the cluster of porch lights flickering on across the water. Neighbors were stirring, emerging from their homes in robes and slippers, squinting into the darkness to discern the source of the commotion. Their murmurs carried faintly but sharply across the night. "What did he do?" someone whispered. Is he trespassing? Another inquired. A young man in athletic shorts shouted from a nearby deck. Leave him alone, Eleanor. You don't own the lake. Eleanor whipped her head toward the voice, glaring, but Arthur noticed the first crack in her unshakable confidence. Officers, Arthur said, forcing his tone to remain level. All I intended was to fish and camp. That is all. I am not violating any statutes. You are currently standing on private property, and it is mine. The lead officer, whose nameplate read Ramirez, studied him for a long moment, then looked back at Eleanor. Ma'am, we will need to confirm jurisdiction before we proceed. Her face flushed crimson, lips tightening like a vice. Fine, but don't claim I didn't warn you when you discover he is fabricating a story. Arthur felt his jaw clench. This wasn't merely a misunderstanding anymore. It was about authority, assumptions, and a line drawn in the sand, quite literally. And from the look of things, the night was far from concluded. But as Arthur stood there in the glare of those flashlights, he had no idea the true narrative was just beginning, and the neighborhood's long-held secrets were about to spill into the open. The gravel path leading down to Arthur's camp now resembled a procession route. Pickup trucks idled with headlights cutting through the trees, casting long shadows that made the lake shimmer like polished steel. More deputies arrived, their radios crackling with urgency. By the time Arthur had fully emerged from his tent, pulling on a flannel shirt, he counted at least 4 uniformed officers surrounding him. He raised both hands, not out of culpability, but because the palpable tension in the air demanded it. Listen, he said, steadying his voice. I want no trouble. I just wish to sleep on my own land, that's all. Officer Ramirez took a slow step closer. Mr. Hayes, here is the situation. We have a complainant. He gestured toward Eleanor Vance, alleging this area falls under her association's purview. We need to confirm property boundaries before making any decisions. Do you comprehend? Arthur inhaled deeply, fighting the urge to retort sharply. I comprehend, but you are already on my land. That is what you need to confirm first. Eleanor interrupted, clipboard tucked tightly to her chest. Officers, this man is camping where children swim, where families bring their boats. He has no legitimate reason to be here. I have maintained the safety of this community for decades, and I will not permit some outsider to ruin it. Arthur whipped his head toward her. Outsider? I invested nearly every penny of my savings to acquire this place. How can I be an outsider on my own property? Property dispute in the dead of night. Always a chaotic situation, one of the deputies muttered under his breath. Arthur heard it and felt the sting. A dispute implied equal claims from both sides, but he knew in his bones, in the folder of documents resting in his truck's glove compartment, that this land was undeniably his. Just then a neighbor stepped closer from the road. He was an older gentleman in a faded university cap, holding a coffee mug despite the late hour. His name was Harold Jenkins, a long-term resident of Lakeview Estates. Eleanor, Harold called out, his tone weary, that strip by the water never belonged to the HOA. Do you recall the boundary markers? Back when they installed the fence, the surveyor made it unequivocally clear. Eleanor turned sharply, her face tightening. Harold, do not interject yourself. This is official business. But the damage was done. Arthur could see doubt flicker across the deputies' faces. Officer Ramirez's radio buzzed. A voice from dispatch requested parcel numbers. Do you possess the deed, Mr. Hayes? In my truck, Arthur said, pointing toward the gravel where his vehicle was parked. May I retrieve it? Slowly, Officer Ramirez instructed, hands still near his sidearm. Arthur exhaled, walked carefully to the truck, and pulled a manila envelope from the glove box. He handed it over. The deputy flipped through the pages with his flashlight. Survey maps, plat drawings, a signed deed of sale from Travis County. Everything was there. This appears to be in order thus far, Officer Ramirez murmured. Eleanor's voice cut through the night like a blade. It is irrelevant what papers he brandishes. This land has been under our stewardship for years. I have organized cleanups, patrols, even safety inspections. That proves it is ours in practice. if not in name. Arthur let out a humorless laugh. So you've been trespassing all this time, and you believe that legitimizes your claim? The words rippled through the growing crowd. Some neighbors murmured agreement with Arthur. Others shook their heads, siding with Eleanor. Mom, Officer Ramirez said evenly. Property law does not function in that manner, but Eleanor was relentless. I know what I have observed, and I know what transpires when strangers erect tents near families. I will not tolerate this place transforming into some uncontrolled campground. Strangers? Arthur shot back. Look at my license. Look at the deed. The only strangers here are the ones asserting I do not belong. His words carried more weight than he expected. A silence fell over a portion of the crowd. A younger couple whispered to each other on the sidelines, clearly uncomfortable. The older neighbor, Harold, spoke again. He is correct, Eleanor. You cannot lay claim to land merely because you occasionally maintain the grass. Officer Ramirez closed the folder, tucking it under his arm. Here is what we will do. We will verify with county records in the morning. Until then, no arrests, no removals. Everyone goes home. But Eleanor wouldn't relent. This is outrageous. You cannot simply allow him to remain. What if he poses a danger? That one word, dangerous, hit Arthur like a physical blow. He stepped forward, pointing at her. You do not know me. You know absolutely nothing about me. Yet, here you are, labeling me dangerous because I chose to camp on my own land. How is that justifiable? The crowd shifted again, whispers buzzing louder now. A teenager filming with his phone muttered, "This is going viral." Arthur felt the adrenaline spike, his throat tight. He didn't want to be a headline. He wanted to be left in peace, but the night was only gaining momentum, and the next turn would drag the private dispute into the spotlight for everyone to see. The standoff by the water felt precariously balanced. On one side, Arthur stood with his documents, fists clenching and unclenching, trying to regulate his breathing. On the other, Eleanor Vance, her clipboard gripped so tightly her knuckles blanched. And in the middle, deputies shifting their weight, caught between protocol and the loudest voice in the assembly. "Show me that deed," Eleanor demanded, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Officer Ramirez held it close to his vest. "Ma'am, this is evidence. You will have your opportunity if necessary. Right now, I am managing the situation." Eleanor stepped closer, her perfume thick in the humid air. "Evidence? Do not be deceived. You understand how easily papers can be falsified. How do you know this man isn't some squatter with counterfeit documents?" Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "Forged? You genuinely believe I awoke one morning and decided to fabricate a property deed for a ranch I do not possess? Please." The younger deputy, Badge Chen, attempted to ease the tension. "Perhaps we should all take a step back. There's no need for raised voices." But Eleanor was unyielding. "No, officer, this is precisely when one raises their voice. This is our lakefront. We have worked diligently to keep it secure. And now he appears, pitching a tent, behaving as if he presides over the shoreline." "Lady, I did not request a crown," Arthur shot back, his voice low but charged with heat. "I asked for a fishing rod and some peace and quiet, that's all." The crowd murmured again. Porch lights blinked on further down the road. A woman in a pink robe hugged her arms against the cool breeze and whispered to her husband, "Why don't they just leave him alone?" Another neighbor, a tall man in a fishing gear cap, spoke louder. "He provided proof. What more do you require, Eleanor?" That only fueled her fire. "Proof is meaningless if it is fraudulent." Officer Ramirez raised his voice, firm now. "That is enough. Until we receive confirmation from the county office, no one is departing the shoreline. We require verification, period." Arthur exhaled through his nose, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. "Fine. Then let us contact the county right now. They possess digital records. It's 2025, not 1955. Officer Chen smirked despite himself. "He has a valid point." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You are making an error. You do not know this man. You are unaware of the types of individuals who infiltrate communities and claim possessions that are not theirs." Arthur stepped forward, closing the distance until only the deputy stood between them. You keep referring to this man as if I lack a name. It is Arthur Hayes. Remember it, because the only person trespassing tonight isn't me. It's you. The air grew heavier. The deputies glanced at one another, silently debating whether to intervene. A voice from the crowd broke the silence. It was Harold Jenkins again. She knows better. We all do. That strip by the water has been outside the HOA since they established the subdivision. You were present, Eleanor. You signed off on it. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. Do not distort the past, Harold. I have dedicated years to safeguarding this place. I will not permit it to descend into chaos, because some man believes a piece of paper renders him invulnerable. Arthur laughed again, this time without humour. Piece of paper? That is called a deed. That is called ownership. If you cannot respect that, then perhaps you are the one who believes you are invulnerable. Officer Chen finally spoke up, rubbing the back of his neck. Mr. Hayes, may I inquire something? Why here? Why camp by the water instead of staying in the house? Arthur softened for a moment, glancing at the tent behind him. Because my father always desired a place by the lake. He did not live long enough to see it. So tonight, I thought I would camp where he would have camped. Simple as that. That explanation didn't just hang in the air. It shifted it. A few neighbours nodded quietly. Even Officer Chen's shoulders relaxed. But Eleanor wouldn't let it go. She jabbed her finger toward Arthur. Do not be swayed by his narrative. It is sentimental nonsense. If he genuinely owns this property, why does no one in this neighbourhood know his name? Because I purchased it last month, Arthur replied evenly. Not that I owe you an explanation. The deputy's radios crackled again. Dispatch confirmed first they were retrieving parcel records from county files. The hold on the crowd's breath was almost audible. Shouldn't be long, Officer Ramirez said. Eleanor scoffed. While you await, perhaps check if he has any warrants. Men like him usually do. The insult hit Arthur hard. His nostrils flared, but he maintained his composure. You don't know me, Eleanor. You don't know the hours I dedicate, the family I support, the taxes I pay. All you perceive is what you wish to perceive. Silence spread again. Even the water seemed to still. The truth was hanging in plain sight now. This wasn't about camping or safety or neighbourhood regulations. It was about control. But as the radios buzzed and the paperwork inched closer to proving Arthur's claim, the standoff was about to take a turn that no one on that shoreline would forget. The story of that night didn't just endure in memory. It persisted on video, grainy, shaky, raw. The deputy's body cameras captured every glare, every accusation, every second of Arthur Hayes standing barefoot on his own land, striving to demonstrate his rightful presence. When the footage was later released, people watching online could almost feel what Arthur felt. The harsh brightness of the flashlights in his eyes, the way his voice cracked under the strain of defending himself, the impatience in Eleanor Vance's tone as she insisted again and again that he had no right to be there. The video commenced with Officer Ramirez's camera. His breathing was audible in the microphone as he approached Arthur's tent. The beam of light jerked across the canvas, caught Arthur blinking, hands raised halfway in surprise. Viewers could detect the edge in Ramirez's voice. Step out! Show us your hands! Arthur complied, looking more exhausted than menacing. His voice was calm. This is my land. I purchased it. The paperwork's in my truck. Already those watching could sense the imbalance. A man alone with a fishing pole in a tent, surrounded by deputies and accused by a neighbour who sounded more like a prosecutor than a concerned resident. Switch to Officer Chen's camera. It captured the moment Eleanor appeared, stepping forward with her blazer and clipboard, her voice sharp, almost rehearsed. That's him, he's trespassing. This is HOA land. In the video, Arthur's head turned sharply. His tone carried disbelief. Eh? What HOA? My deed says otherwise. The crowd watching from their porches was barely visible in the footage, but their whispers floated on the microphone. What's occurring? One voice inquired. Another observed, Isn't that Harold's old boundary line? Body cam footage doesn't prevaricate, it doesn't embellish, it doesn't edit, and in this instance, it revealed not just a property dispute, but the layers of suspicion and bias simmering under the surface. Eleanor's voice cut through the night. He's lying. He has no legitimate business here. I've been here 20 years, and I know this land better than anyone. And then Arthur's reply, low, steady, shaking with anger, landed like a punch in the gut for viewers later. You've been utilizing my land without authorization. That does not make it yours. The video showed Chen glancing sideways at Ramirez, uncertainty in his posture. He wasn't fully convinced of Eleanor's claim, but he also wasn't prepared to challenge her directly. His silence spoke more volumes than his words. Another clip from Ramirez's body cam caught the moment Arthur handed over his manila envelope. His hands shook slightly as he retrieved the deed from the folder. Not from guilt, anyone could discern that, but from the sheer exhaustion of being challenged on something he knew was correct. Ramirez held the papers under the flashlight, mumbling to Chen. Looks authentic. Signatures aligned. Eleanor lunged forward in the frame, jabbing a finger. Don't be deceived. People forge documents all the time. Look at him. Does he look like a landowner to you? That last sentence spread like a wildfire once the video leaked. Viewers online froze the frame, rewound, replayed it. Comment sections lit up. What does that even imply? She voiced the unspoken truth, and then in Chen's footage, Arthur's voice cut through the static. Do not reduce me to a stereotype. My name is Arthur Hayes, and this is my property. Say it with me. My property. Watching later, it was clear Arthur wasn't just addressing Eleanor. He was speaking to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, even when they unequivocally did. The video also caught Harold Jenkins stepping forward, his voice gravelly but certain. He's right, Eleanor. This land was never under HOA lines. You were there. You signed the agreement. Eleanor's glare at Harold was captured in perfect clarity. Her lips pressed into a thin, furious line, eyes hard. For people watching the footage after the fact, it was almost cinematic. The lone neighbour standing up against the HOA president, deputies call it in the middle, Arthur holding his ground against accusations that twisted with each passing minute. The body cam footage didn't just depict a dispute. It showcased the weight of assumptions. It showed the power of one person's accusation to mobilize authority in the middle of the night. And it showed Arthur's determination not to shrink, even when the odds were stacked against him. But what it didn't show, what the cameras couldn't capture, was the quiet anxiety simmering in Arthur's chest. Because while the papers in his hand proved ownership, his gut told him the fight wasn't over. But as the deputies radioed in the parcel number and dispatch worked to verify the lines, the real truth about who had been trespassing all along was about to come into focus. The radios finally crackled with more than static. The voice from dispatch carried through the humid night air. Parcel 3247B, registered owner, Arthur Hayes, acquired last month from Travis County Land Auction, not within HOA jurisdiction. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd shifted, heads turning toward Eleanor Vance as if waiting for her reaction. The deputies stood still, their flashlights lowering slightly. Arthur exhaled, relief flickering across his face, but only for a moment, because Eleanor didn't back down. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the hush. That doesn't alter anything. We've maintained that shoreline for years, cleared brush, paid for patrols, organized cleanups. Just because the county paperwork doesn't bear our name, doesn't mean it isn't ours in practice. Arthur laughed, but it wasn't amused. It was bitter. So let me understand this. You've been trespassing on my land for years, and now you believe that makes you the rightful owner? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors looked down at their feet, others at Eleanor. One man muttered, She did make us clear trash over there last summer. Harold Jenkins crossed his arms, his coffee mug still in hand. I informed you all back then, the HOA possesses no rights beyond the fence line. That land was county property until Hayes purchased it. You knew that, Eleanor. You simply disregarded it. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Officer Chen cleared his throat. Technically, the records confirm Mr. Hayes is the owner. That means any previous use by the HOA could be deemed unauthorized. Eleanor snapped her head toward him, eyes flashing. Unauthorized? I dedicated my life to safeguarding this community. Without me, this place would be overrun with strangers, utilizing the lake like a public park. Strangers? Arthur shot back. I'm not a stranger. I'm the owner. And the only people trespassing here tonight are the ones asserting rights they don't possess. The word trespassing hung heavy. It was a reversal. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't the victim. They were the ones stepping where they didn't belong. A younger woman in the crowd, wearing a hoodie and clutching her phone, spoke up. Eleanor, if he owns it, then you've been mistaken this entire time. Doesn't that imply you've been leading us onto land that isn't ours? The HOA president bristled, chin lifting. We acted in good faith. We believed it was ours. Arthur's patience snapped. He stepped forward, his voice rising. No, you assumed it was yours because you desired control, because you thought no one would challenge you. But now someone has, and you cannot cope with it. The deputies didn't move to silence him. Even they seemed caught in the veracity of his words. Harold added quietly, You should have verified the records, Eleanor. Instead, you made everyone think the shoreline was yours to govern. Her face flushed crimson. Don't you dare admonish me. I've preserved property values. I've kept outsiders away. By trespassing, Arthur cut in. By appointing yourself queen of land that never belonged to you. The crowd buzzed again, louder this time. Neighbours who once remained silent now whispered about HOA overreach, about fines they'd paid, about rules that never seemed equitable. The cracks in Eleanor's authority were widening. Officer Ramirez finally spoke, calm but firm. Ma'am, with respect, the county records are unambiguous. This land is not under HOA jurisdiction, which means Mr. Hayes has every right to camp here. The word every echoed. Some neighbours nodded. A few even clapped softly, though they stopped quickly under Eleanor's glare. Arthur felt vindicated, but only partially, because the way Eleanor looked at him, cold, defiant, told him this wasn't the end. She wasn't going to relinquish power that easily. He turned to the deputies. So what now? Are you going to instruct her to stay off my land, or do I have to contend with this every weekend? Officer Ramirez hesitated. We'll file a report. That way, if it recurs, there's documentation. But I suggest everyone clear out tonight. It's late and tensions are high. Eleanor sneered. Documentation? That's laughable, you'll see. This isn't over. Arthur shook his head, tired but unbroken. You are correct about one thing. It's not over, because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is my land. The cameras caught every second. His voice carried conviction, the kind that sticks with people long after the moment passes. But if Arthur thought the confrontation would conclude with paperwork and silence, he was wrong. Because what came next wasn't calm resolution. It was escalation, fueled by pride and fear, colliding head-on. The night air felt charged, as if even the cicadas had fallen silent to listen. Arthur stood with his arms crossed, the deed back in his hand, while Eleanor hovered at the deputy's shoulders, unwilling to concede. The crowd, once scattered and whispering, had edged closer. Porch lights glowed like watchtowers, phones angled high, recording everything. Officer Ramirez's voice carried the authority of someone trying to restore calm, though his patience was thinning. All right, folks, we've confirmed the property belongs to Mr. Hayes. I suggest everyone return home. But Eleanor Vance wasn't prepared to retreat. She stepped forward, pointing at Arthur with her clipboard like it was a weapon. You cannot simply allow him to remain. He's confrontational. He's unstable. What if he poses a danger? The word dangerous struck like a slap. Arthur's jaw tightened. He took a step toward her, stopping only when Officer Chen raised a hand. "Ma'am," Chen said carefully, "labeling someone dangerous without proof isn't constructive." "It's not an accusation, it's common sense," Eleanor snapped back. "Look at him camping out here in the dark, arguing with all of us. This isn't how normal residents conduct themselves." Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "Normal residents? You mean the ones who adhere to your rules, pay your fees, and never question your authority? That's not normal. That's control." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Harold Jenkins muttered, "She's gone too far this time." Eleanor turned on him. "You always had an issue with leadership, Harold. Perhaps that's why your lawn resembles a jungle." "Better a jungle than a dictatorship," Harold shot back, eliciting chuckles from some neighbors. The deputies tried to intervene. "Enough," Ramirez barked. "This isn't a neighborhood assembly. Mr. Hayes has presented proof of ownership. This matter is concluded." But Eleanor pressed harder. "No, it's not concluded. He hasn't demonstrated his true identity. He could have faked that paperwork. He could be squatting until he flips the land." She looked at the deputy deities, her voice rising. "Detain him until you're certain. Keep him here until morning." The crowd went still. Even the deputies looked taken aback. "You want me arrested?" Arthur said slowly, disbelief heavy in his voice. "For camping on my own land?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "If you have nothing to conceal, you won't object to being held until this is resolved." Arthur felt his chest burn with anger. He turned toward the crowd, his voice rising so every neighbor could hear. "This is what transpires when people permit fear and control to govern everything. She isn't asking for safety. She's asking for obedience." Officer Chen shifted uneasily, glancing at Ramirez. "Technically, we could bring him in until records are fully verified," he said, his tone cautious. "We've done it before in disputed property cases." "No," Ramirez countered firmly. "He possesses papers, identification, and dispatch confirmation. That is sufficient. We cannot detain someone for being correct." Arthur's heart thudded. For the first time all night, someone in authority had stated it plainly. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "If you won't perform your duty, then the HOA will handle it. We'll file injunctions. We'll secure lawyers. He won't endure here a month." Arthur turned to her, his voice quieter now but sharp as glass. "You think threats intimidate me? I acquired this land with every resource I possessed. My father envisioned this place before he passed away. You cannot seize that from me. Not with rules, not with fines, not with intimidation." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded in quiet support. A teenager whispered to his mother, "He's right, Mum, this isn't fair." Eleanor's lips curled into a thin smile. "We'll see how right he feels when the HOA legal team gets involved." Harold Jenkins raised his voice from the sidelines. "You don't have a leg to stand on, Eleanor. You've been managing this neighborhood like a personal kingdom. But the truth's exposed now, and people are wary of it." The deputies exchanged glances again. Chen muttered under his breath, "Never witnessed an HOA this hostile." Arthur stepped forward, looking Eleanor directly in the eye. "I'm not relocating. I'm not departing. You can contact whomever you wish. But this land is mine, and I'm not permitting anyone to take it from me." His words carried like a bell over the water. For the first time that night, the crowd didn't just murmur. They clapped. A few started small, then others joined in. Eleanor's face darkened, her authority cracking under the sound. Ramirez raised his voice above the noise. "That's enough for tonight. Everyone clear out. Mr. Hayes stays. If anyone trespasses again, they'll answer to the law." The crowd slowly dispersed, though many lingered, eyes flicking between Arthur and Eleanor. Phones clicked off, porch lights dimmed, but the tension didn't dissipate. It only shifted. But as the neighbors retreated into their homes, the division in Lakeview Estates was only deepening. And what began as a midnight confrontation was spiraling into a battle that would split the community in two. By morning, the entire neighborhood was aware. What started as flashlights and shouting by the lake had become the sole topic of conversation on the winding streets of Lakeview Estates. The HOA email list lit up before sunrise. Eleanor's message, typed in her clipped, no-nonsense style. Late last night, an individual claiming ownership of lakefront property attempted to camp in an area long managed by the association. Law enforcement was called. The matter remains unresolved. All residents should remain vigilant. She didn't use Arthur's name. She referred to him as an individual. But that was enough. By the time Arthur walked up to his truck the next morning, neighbours slowed their cars when passing. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others stared as if he were already guilty of something unspoken. Harold Jenkins stopped by on foot, coffee mug in hand as always. "She's fabricating a story," Harold said, shaking his head. "Eleanor cannot tolerate losing face. She'll drag this through the mud until people forget what truly transpired." Arthur sighed. "She already commenced last night, calling me dangerous, acting like camping makes me a criminal." Harold leaned against the truck. "Don't underestimate her. Folks here are divided. Some have desired her removal for years. Others would follow her off a cliff if she asked." It didn't take long before the divisions manifested themselves in real time. At the small cafe near the subdivision entrance, two women sat at a corner table, their voices carrying across the room. "She's right, you know," one whispered. "He appeared from nowhere. Who just acquires land and camps on it like that?" A friend shook her head. "You observed the body cam footage. He had the deed. Eleanor was the one trespassing, not him." The first woman scoffed. "It's irrelevant. People don't just materialize without warning. If he sought peace, why purchase land here? Why not somewhere else?" Meanwhile, in the gas station parking lot, a teenager pulled up a video on his phone, showing his friends the clip he'd taken of Arthur declaring, "This land is mine." It had already accumulated thousands of views on social media. "Dude's a legend," one kid said. "Finally stood up to her," another frowned. "Legend or not, he's going to have a target on his back. The HOA doesn't forgive." Back at the lake, Arthur tried to shake the weight of everyone's eyes. He sat on the tailgate of his truck, staring at the water, wondering if he'd made a mistake buying the land at all. That's when another neighbour walked up, a younger woman this time, wearing jogging gear, earbuds hanging around her neck. Her name was Camilla Soto. "I witnessed what occurred," she said softly. "I wanted to say, I believe you. I know Eleanor. She's been overreaching for years. People just don't wish to cross her." Arthur looked up, surprised. "Thanks, I appreciate that." She hesitated before adding, "But be cautious. She does not handle humiliation well. If she feels like she lost, she'll double down." As the day stretched on, the split became clearer. Some neighbours nodded at Arthur, offering quick words of support. Others avoided his gaze, retreating into their houses. It was as if the whole community had been forced to pick a side overnight. That evening, while Arthur was packing up his tent, another man showed up, tall, grey-haired, wearing an expensive golf polo. Calvin Pierce, one of the HOA board members. He didn't come yelling. His tone was measured, almost polite. "Mr. Hayes, I wish to speak privately. Last night was unfortunate. The board feels Eleanor may have been a little too forceful." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "A little too forceful. She attempted to have me arrested." Calvin held up his hands. "I'm not defending her tone, but you should understand. People here are protective of their routines. Change does not sit well. If you desire peace, you might consider collaborating with the HOA instead of opposing it." "Collaborate with the individuals who try to drive me off my own land?" Arthur asked flatly. Calvin's smile was thin. "Sometimes it's simpler to adapt than to break. Think about it." He walked off without waiting for an answer. Harold appeared from across the road, shaking his head. That's how they operate. Smile in your face, twist your arm behind your back. Arthur looked out at the lake, his jaw tight. I'm not adapting. As the sun set, the split in Lakeview Estates grew sharper. Some neighbours wanted Eleanor gone, whispering about calling a vote to replace her. Others rallied to her defence, convinced Arthur was an intruder threatening the order of their community. And through it all, Arthur felt the weight of being the dividing line, the man in the middle of a neighbourhood war he never asked for. But the deeper the split became, the more Arthur realised this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power, and the HOA wasn't about to relinquish it without a fight. 2 days after the lakefront showdown, Arthur drove into downtown Austin with a knot in his stomach. He had an appointment at the Travis County Clerk's office, and he wasn't leaving without a certified copy of his property deed. If Eleanor Vance wanted to question legitimacy, then he would bring her the kind of proof no one could dispute. Stamped, signed, and official. Inside the office, the clerk, a middle-aged man with thinning hair named Thomas Olson, greeted him at the counter. I require every record you possess, Arthur said firmly. Deed, plat, maps, surveys. Anything that demonstrates where my land begins and where it concludes. Thomas tapped away at his computer, then disappeared into the back. 10 minutes later he returned with a folder stacked with documents. This parcel isn't complicated. The county sold it at auction last month, fair and square. Records extend back 30 years, never part of Lakeview Estates. Arthur scanned the crisp papers, relief washing through him. Can I obtain certified copies of all of it? Already stamped, Thomas replied, sliding them across. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're mistaken. By that evening, Arthur had spread the maps across the hood of his truck, letting Harold Jenkins and Camilla Soto study them. The survey lines were clear. His land jutted against Lake Travis, outside the HOA fence, outside their bylaws, outside Eleanor's reach. Harold whistled low. This is airtight. They cannot distort this. Camilla frowned. Don't underestimate them. People like Eleanor don't care about facts when pride is at stake. And she was right, because that same night, Eleanor called an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers were stuffed in mailboxes. The subject line of her email read, Community under threat. By the time Arthur arrived, certified documents in hand, the community centre parking lot was full. Dozens of neighbours packed the folding chairs, arms crossed, waiting for answers. Deputies Ramirez and Chen were there too, standing near the back, knowing things could turn ugly. Eleanor stood at the front, microphone in hand, her tone sharp but steady. We are here tonight because our neighbourhood is at risk. A man has claimed ownership of lakefront property long cared for by this association. He has camped, disrupted, and threatened our peace. We cannot allow this to continue unchecked. The crowd murmured, some nodded, others looked sceptical. Arthur didn't wait to be invited. He stepped forward, holding the folder high. Enough lies. You wish to discuss peace? Let us discuss truth. He laid the maps across a table at the front, his finger tracing the thick black lines. Here's the county's certified survey. Here's the deed stamped by the clerk's office. Here are 30 years of records showing the HOA never owned this land. Not once. Not ever. The room grew quiet as neighbours leaned closer. The bold stamps of Travis County shone under the fluorescent lights. Harold stood and pointed. There it is, plain as day. Eleanor, you knew about that boundary years ago. You just pretended it wasn't real. Gasps rose from the crowd. Heads swiveled toward Eleanor. She opened her mouth but faltered. That's not the point, she stammered finally. Paperwork doesn't erase the fact that we've maintained that shoreline. We've invested time and money. That counts for something. Not in the eyes of the law, Officer Ramirez said flatly from the back. What counts is what's on record, and the record is clear. This land belongs to Mr. Hayes. Murmurs turned to open whispers now. A woman near the front crossed her arms. So you've been charging us HOA fees to take care of land that wasn't even ours? Another voice chimed in, angrier. I paid fines for using that shoreline last summer. You told me it was restricted. Eleanor's face flushed crimson. I did what was necessary to protect this community. Arthur's voice rose, filling the room. No, you did what was necessary to protect your control. You overstepped. You trespassed. And you made everyone believe it was for their own good. For the first time, applause broke out. Not from everyone, but enough to rattle the walls. Some neighbours clapped tentatively, others loudly, and a few even stood. Eleanor slammed her clipboard onto the table, her voice trembling. If you side with him, then don't come crying when our neighbourhood falls apart. Order requires leadership, and leadership means making hard calls. Camilla stood, her voice steady but cutting. Leadership also means telling the truth, and you haven't done that. The room split. Half the chairs leaned forward toward Arthur's documents, half glared at him like an intruder. Officer Chen whispered to Ramirez, She's losing them. Ramirez nodded. Yeah, but people this invested, they don't walk away quietly. Arthur gathered his papers, looking around the room. I didn't come here to divide anyone. I came here because my father dreamed of land by the water, and I made it happen. All I wanted was a place to fish and rest. But if standing up for what's mine divides this community, then maybe you should ask yourselves why. The room went quiet again, his words settling heavy, but even as Arthur packed his documents, he knew facts weren't the end of the fight. Because when pride and power are threatened, the truth alone isn't always enough. When Arthur drove home that night, the roads of Lakeview Estates felt different. Houses he had passed a dozen times without thought now seemed loaded with stares and whispered opinions. The weight of the emergency meeting clung to him like dust after a storm. At the stop sign near the subdivision exit, he sat for a long minute with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the glow of the dashboard. He had shown them the deed, the maps, the stamped signatures. He had proved everything he needed to prove, yet the uneasiness wasn't gone. Truth had been on his side, but truth wasn't what people clung to. People clung to loyalty, fear, and habit. By morning, the community was buzzing again. Only this time, the division was impossible to ignore. At the small cafe near the marina, the usual laughter over biscuits and coffee had soured into hushed debates. Two older men sat by the window, one shaking his head. She's finished, he muttered. The HOA can't survive this. You saw those documents. The other leaned back, arms crossed. Don't be so sure. Folks like Eleanor don't back down. She'll rally the loyal ones, stir up fear. This Hayes guy better watch his back. Across town, Arthur sat at a diner booth with Harold Jenkins and Camilla Soto. The waitress topped off their coffee as Harold leaned forward. You did everything right, Harold said. Certified copies, maps. Hell, you could teach a class on property rights after this. But Eleanor doesn't care about right. She cares about control, Camilla nodded. And the people who've leaned on her for years? They don't want to admit they were wrong. It's easier to keep blaming you. Arthur sipped his coffee, staring at the steam. So what am I supposed to do? Fight every week just to use my own land? You stand firm, Harold said. She'll push, but if you concede once, she'll never cease. The only language people like her understand is resistance. That afternoon, while Arthur worked on clearing brush by the shoreline, a pair of neighbours walked past, deliberately slowing. They didn't greet him. One muttered loud enough for Arthur to hear, "This is what happens when you allow outsiders in." Arthur paused, rake in hand, chest tightening. He almost shouted back, but bit his tongue. Their words stung, but feeding the fire wasn't going to help. Later, Camilla stopped by with groceries. "You're not alone," she told him firmly. "People are talking. Some of us are planning to call a vote to replace Eleanor. The HOA has limits. Even she can't run it like a kingdom forever." Arthur nodded slowly. The thought gave him some hope, but also worry. And if they don't, what if they rally behind her instead? "Then you keep fighting," Camilla replied, "because the truth doesn't stop being true just because it's unpopular." Meanwhile, In living rooms across the subdivision, arguments flared. Couples who once agreed on everything suddenly found themselves divided. One spouse defended Eleanor's years of work, the other condemned her lies. Dinner tables became battlegrounds. Group chats exploded with accusations, memes, even clips from the body cam footage spreading like wildfire. Eleanor herself wasn't silent. She doubled down, sending long emails painting Arthur as a threat to stability. She claimed he was planning to turn his property into a rental campground, warning of outsiders swarming the lake. Some believed her. Others rolled their eyes. But no one ignored it. By the week's end, Arthur couldn't stop thinking about his father. His dad had worked construction all his life, saving for a dream he never got to live. Arthur had made that dream real, yet here he was fighting just to sit by a fire pit in peace. That Friday evening he lit another campfire by the water. The flames reflected in his tired eyes as he spoke out loud, though no one was there to hear it. "You'd tell me to stand tall, Dad. You'd say don't let them push you off what you earned. So that's what I'll do." He leaned back in the camp chair, listening to the crackle of wood and the soft lap of water. For the first time in days, he felt steady again. But the peace wouldn't last, because as Arthur strengthened his resolve, Eleanor's anger was hardening too, and her next move would come with consequences neither of them could ignore. Saturday morning rolled in with the kind of quiet Arthur had been craving all week. The lake was calm, the early sun glinting off the water like glass. He made coffee over the campfire, sitting back in his chair, breathing in the smell of damp earth and pine. For a brief moment, it felt like his father was sitting beside him, nodding proud. But even in the calm, he knew the fight wasn't truly over. HOA politics had a way of dragging on, of festering in back rooms and emails. He had already seen it. The suspicious stares, the cold shoulders, the rumours Eleanor planted like weeds. Yet despite it all, he was still there, still standing on the land he had bought fair and square. Later that afternoon, a knock came at his door. Harold and Camilla stood outside, both looking worn but determined. "She's already pushing again," Camilla said. "Emails, phone calls, warning people that you're going to transform this place into some sort of rental park. It's ugly." Arthur shook his head, frustration tightening in his chest. "She's not even ashamed by the truth. She'd rather propagate a lie than admit she was wrong." Harold stepped forward, setting his mug down on the porch rail. "That's who she is, but here's the thing. You revealed something to people they hadn't witnessed before. You stood up to her, and a lot of folks noticed." Camilla added softly, "Some are afraid to speak out, but more than you think are with you. They just need someone to remind them it's acceptable to stop being afraid." Arthur sat back, letting the words sink in. He hadn't asked to be anyone's symbol. He only wanted to fish, to camp, to honour his dad's dream. But maybe this wasn't just about him anymore. That evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, Arthur walked back to the lakefront with Harold and Camilla. They set up chairs, a cooler of drinks and a small fire. Before long, a few other neighbours trickled over. People who had once kept their distance now approached cautiously but curious. One man said quietly, "I paid a fine last year for taking my boat out from this shore. If it wasn't HOA land, then I guess I've been misled." Another woman added, "We allowed her to dictate to us because we thought she was protecting us. But perhaps she was just protecting her control." The group sat together watching the fire crackle. Arthur didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. He simply said, "All I ever desired was to be here, to sit by the water without being told I don't belong. That's it." The simplicity of his words settled heavier than any speech could. By the end of the night, Arthur felt something shift. Not the whole neighbourhood, not yet, but enough. Enough people realising that authority unchecked is dangerous. Enough realising that silence can be as harmful as lies. In the days that followed, conversations kept spreading. The HOA wasn't dissolved overnight and Eleanor didn't vanish, but her power was cracked, and cracks only grow. For the first time, the community questioned instead of obeyed, And Arthur, tired but unbroken, found strength in knowing he hadn't just defended land. He'd defended the principle that truth matters, no matter how loud the lies. Standing at the shoreline one last time that week, he whispered to himself, "Dad, we did it. We didn't let them take it." The lesson was clear. Property rights aren't just about paperwork. They're about respect. Respect for boundaries, respect for ownership, respect for people. And when those things are ignored, the cost is always higher than anyone expects. So if you're listening to this, take it with you. Don't let anyone strip you of what's yours. Not through intimidation, not through lies, not through fear. Stand firm. Because if you don't defend your ground, someone else will claim it as theirs. And if you want more stories that remind us what's at stake when we stay silent and the power of speaking up, make sure to subscribe to Black Resilience. Because these aren't just stories, they're lessons. And sometimes they're warnings. The fight for respect doesn't end when the paperwork is stamped. It ends when people decide to live by the truth.